For me, this is the only thank you note in all my years, which I didn't expect. It's the only thank you note I've ever gotten in my 30 years of, I mean, you go visit people in the hospital, this is what you do, you didn't expect. The thank you note was lovely, thank you.
You asked me for an example of poetry, so I wrote you.
Oh, thank you. Oh, wow, okay.
So you ready?
Well, you're very welcome. I'm surprised you've never received a thank you note before.
Oh my God, look at this. This is so sweet. So sweet. Hi, Nora. You gonna stay for my lecture today?
No, we gotta go see all that on.
You mean you don't want to stay for my lecture? Oh, come on. Come on. I know you'll enjoy it. I know that you'll enjoy listening to me go on and on for an hour. You want to hear me talk for an hour? No?
Here,
I'm just kidding.
About 30 seconds.
Okay.
We're gonna get over this side more.
So I can see your face.
She who must be
All right,
obeyed.
You're all set.
Thank you. Oh, this is very nice. Very nice.
He woke up yesterday morning inspired.
Beautiful. How are you feeling? I should really send you home just to rest. I bet you were at church this morning.
Yes. I opened the doors, closed the doors.
Yeah. What's that?
I opened the doors, I closed the doors.
I know you want to do that, and I know that you're.
God says you're my servant, so show up.
Oh, well, okay. Did you have a nice crowd this morning?
115 people.
115? That's a nice crowd.
Yeah, not bad for a good, pretty day.
No.
Summer's gonna be a lot worse.
Yeah.
Oh, really? People don't come
And
in
it goes
summer?
down, way down.
Yeah, but it's not fancy poetry, but I thought I'd just put together a little two-line verses for you.
Mm. What was the sermon about today?
It was about humility.
About what?
Humility.
Humility, okay.
It's how Paul's letter to the Philippians, the first and second chapter, is talking about that you need to be humble in relationships, not beat up on each other.
Mm-hmm. Just if I heard somebody maybe come on. Somebody come on to the thing.
But we felt we needed to honor you, son.
Honor who, me?
Yeah.
How so? I'm not humble.
No, yes, you are.
No, I'm not.
Yes,
No, far from it.
You're.
Anybody that plays golf and piano is not humble.
No.
There are exceptions such as
Yeah,
you.
I have a saying on my little magnet on my on the refrigerator that says, "I gallop, therefore I swear."
There you go. How true is that? Yeah, we're going to have to get out.
That's mainly what you do in golf. I do not throw clubs.
No, my father was very much against me throwing golf clubs.
I do not throw clubs. I look at the vicissitudes of life, and golf is one of them.
Yes. Yes, golf is one of them.
Golf is a humbling game.
Extremely humbling. But to get to play like a pro, I don't think I could devote that kind of time and that kind of attention to that and feel that my life was meaningful in some way.
No.
They pay a tremendous price in terms of time, in terms of building miracles.
Times of learning too. I must say most pros are not real learners.
Oh, somebody's here.
So did you see what I was talking about, apologizing in advance if I got it wrong?
Jesse. Oh, who is Jesse? I don't know who that is.
I didn't know how to spell ta.
Oh, they're very good. It's a good start, Jesse.
Yeah, she's struggling, but she's working hard. It's not for lack of effort.
Hey, Rabbi, can you hear me?
I sure can. Is this Jesse?
Yes, it's Jesse.
Well, glad to have you with us. Jesse, your last, I'm not recognizing you for some reason. Did you want to go video?
Trying to get to video. I'm trying to learn how to do this. I don't use Zoom very much.
Oh, okay.
I went to a temple a couple times last year.
Oh, okay, okay. Do you still live in the area, or here, I'm sure
I live out in Mississippi.
Oh, that's right. That's right. You're a welder, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Do I have that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, good. I'm glad you could join us today. Thank you.
Yeah. How's everything going over there?
Well, good. We've missed you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's okay. I mean, I'm not trying to make you feel, where have you been and stuff, but it's nice to have it. It's nice to see you here.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So, what is today? What is today classes?
Yeah. Well, the next two classes are going to be devoted to Passover because we're getting near. So we're going to be going through the. I'll be talking a little bit about the structure of the Haggadah and some of the hidden themes that sometimes we overlook that are extremely important for the Seder.
All right.
Are you doing anything for Passover? Are you?
No.
You could come here the second day if you'd like. We have a community.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, we have a community Seder on Sunday night at 6:00. It's very nice.
Yeah.
We'd love to have you.
What day is it?
It's going to be April. Let's see, 9. I think it's the 13th of April, Sunday.
All right.
That Sunday, yeah. How are things going?
They're good. Work's good. Been traveling a lot. Been doing different stuff. So
all those years you took care of me.
just trying to find time. The temple's like an hour drive from my house.
Yeah,
so it's hard to get there all the time.
It's quite a distance, yeah, I know.
Yeah.
An hour there and an hour back. I mean, you come on a Friday night, so you can leave at 5, you get here at 6, services are at 7, you come for refreshments afterwards for the Kiddush, and so you look at 7:30, 7:45, by the time you get home, it's 8:45. It's a 4-hour commitment.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I understand it's not convenient.
That isn't southern, more than the apple.
I get that.
Yeah.
Well, okay, I guess we should get started. Trying to
So,
think.
is the temple open today? Can people go in there, or?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's going to be
okay.
closed when I leave, but no, we're open for this. We're open for all activities, and we're open in the course of the week. There's usually somebody here. So, just
I
let
was
us
thinking, about going in today, but I just didn't know. I looked on, I guess, Google Maps, and it said you guys were closed. So I guess I thought it was only video chat for some reason. But I was gonna go into.
Well, you don't want to drive up here and find that that's the case. No, but for these lectures,
Right,
absolutely. Yeah, we're always, we just come at 12:30 and be great.
Yeah.
Okay? All right. Okay, so we're going to get started. Well, it's great to see you, Jesse.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
But we'll talk about after Passover,
Right.
getting some personal.
Okay.
That's right, Ashford, you got it.
Okay.
That was my
So this
lesson
is
to
a
the kids.
very simple Haggadah that we're going to use, but it's got the things in there that we need to talk about, so it'll work out just fine.
This is actually what we'll use at our house.
Yeah, this is a Haggadah that I began to use when I was up at in Hanover for the community Seder we had for the Jewish community, and we thought it was more children oriented, and there is, but for a community Seder it really worked well because the problem with community Seders is that it can be extremely long if you have a text like this, and you have turning a lot of pages, skipping stuff. I mean, it's wonderful This kind of Haggadah, I'll pass it out.
There's many, many different types of
Yeah,
Haggadah.
many different types.
What's a Haggadah?
That's
Oh,
what I'm just
very
gonna
good.
say, please tell me.
Yes.
I just read it.
Here we go.
Take you around it a little
Here's
bit.
another.
I've seen them all.
Oh, the Passover.
You can see the difference
It's the
between that
story,
one.
it's basically the story of Passover.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Haggadah.
Right. It is, but it's a technical term, meaning the telling of Passover.
It's different than the
You know, Haggadah is the story or the tale of Passover, Tale. Yeah. So just, it's a good question. I sometimes forget my audience, and things I don't even think about. But yeah, any questions you should have. You can see if you just open up this one, you can see how much more, how thorough it is.
Some
And
people put lots of artwork. Before I die, my bucket list is to make a Haggadah with
Yeah.
artwork.
I think Elie Wiesel, the great, the Nobel Prize winner and Jewish author, put together a Haggadah as well. So there's different. I mean, all of them have essentially important ingredients that what we're going to focus on this Sunday and what we'll focus on the next. So what I want to do first. So we're going to work out of this one. I just passed that one out just to.
When you come to our house, you'll see about 20 different ones.
Yeah, the best one, the best one still is the Maxwell House. Is the Maxwell House Haggadah? Why do we call it the Maxwell House? Because when you went shopping on the Passover, Maxwell House coffee, I don't know if it still is, used to be kosher for Passover. They would make they would get the hechsher, they would get the certification, and if you bought their coffee, you would get a free Haggadah. Now,
That's what the little.
there's another hechsher that goes with that. You're supposed to have 4 cups of wine, throughout the Seder. The Haggadah had to really be the right Haggadah, it would have to have wine stains, on different pages because you were drinking wine and, you spill some drops, so you pour it and somehow magically the Manischewitz wine would spill onto the Haggadah. So your Haggadah over the years took on greater significance because it had these wine stains and pages that were, so the Maxwell House Haggadah, the one that I like the basic one, but that's not for everybody.
Well, it's all Hebrew.
Yeah, well, it's Hebrew on one side, English on the other, but it's the complete Haggadah. This, again, has the important parts in it, but leaves out a lot of the old traditional things. When my grandfather, may he rest in peace, and who we named our dog after, not because we didn't think highly of my grandfather, but just he had been deceased for a while. He would really speed through. You never took time to explain things or read the English. When I was growing up, you would race right through it. It was all Hebrew, it was all the original, it was all the traditional Orthodox, and that's what I grew up with. And when I went to the yeshiva, there were Haggadot that had classical commentaries on it that were extremely interesting. And today, if you want more traditional readings, which they didn't have when I was growing up, I didn't have when I was in yeshiva, if you go to the Art Scroll website, which is Orthodox.
That's where you got your big prayer book.
Yeah.
They sent me a catalog.
Oh, once you get on their list, you'll get a catalog every.
I want it.
You'll get a catalog every 2 weeks.
And there was a whole bunch
But the
of
great
other
thing
ones.
about them, and I my hat's off to them. Their translations and so forth are very accurate. It has a certain slant to it. It's not an objective translation. It lends itself more towards a very traditional Orthodox praxis kind of Haggadot. But one thing they do have is their footnotes in terms of what the classical commentators, the classical rabbinic commentators, write about are really worthwhile. If you really want to study the classical Haggadah, That's a good, I mean, that's a, you know, much to my chagrin, it's a wonderful resource. If you want a more liberal, the reform, you know, this is a reform Haggadah, very, very good, but it's from a reform perspective. That's why I like just the traditional one without, you know, without what I would call any, you know, additional things added to it. Yes?
So this one, it usually takes us, what, a couple of hours?
Yeah, with the meal, the idea of our Seder's,
Right.
you know, we have found this, that that you can hold people together for about 2 hours. And you've got to figure that the food part and the rituals that precede it are going to take you a total of about 45 minutes. So that leaves you about an hour and 15 minutes. And then after that, you go over that, you know, you begin to lose people.
When I lived in Spa,
Yeah.
Orthodox,
Oh, yeah.
we would go till 2 in the morning.
Yeah.
Oh, my
Because
goodness.
you went to temple first.
Yep.
And it had to happen after sundown, and of course it's in the spring. And so then you eat your meal, and then you go, and, yeah,
Yeah, well, you eat the meal
right.
afterwards and
After,
midway
right.
through.
But you go to temple.
Yeah, and sometimes the service leader and others will actually wear what's called a kittel, which is a white robe. It's similar to a white robe that a priest might wear to indicate the purity of the redemption, the holiness of the night, and so forth. Yeah. Okay, so let's start before. I mean, I can ramble on till 1:30. You know, I can't even say my name in less than 15 minutes. So, so let's start with just as all holy days begin with the rest on page 2, the candle lighting on page 2. And you can see, blessed are you, O Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who has sanctified us through his commandments and has commanded us to light the candle of Yom Tov. Yom Tov is a technical term, literally meaning good day, but any of the festival holidays, including, it's not considered a festival, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So you would recite this, but you don't, the only time you make a specific reference that's not Hadlik Ner Shel Yom Tov is for Hanukkah, and the other is for Yom Kippur. Other than that, it's always Yom Tov, meaning a sacred day. You don't delineate it's Passover, and so forth. The other thing you should note is that in lighting the candle, God has not commanded us to light candles. That's taken from a midrash. There's nothing in the Torah that says that we are commanded to light candles for the Shabbat. That is based on a midrash. Okay? It became a custom to light candles before sunset, 18 minutes before sunset, to usher in the Sabbath, for example. And the same holds true for a Yom Tov. You don't light candles right at sunset. You light candles in the tradition 18 minutes before. It's called Shkia. It's very technical. I don't want to get into that too much. If you turn to the next page, again, this is all by way of introduction.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Why is it that it's the women that always light the candles and say the lesson?
That's a good question. The reason, I mean, there's lots of different reasons. One is cultural. Women traditionally had certain roles. Men would come home from the temple, from the prayers before they would come to say Shabbat or so forth. Women also are ascribed certain things, and maybe this is one of the reasons, is because they didn't worship at the golden calf. There's a midrash that says only the men participated in that. Again, that's midrashic. That's not in the Torah itself. When they worship the golden calf, it's probably based on some grammatical construct. Where they derive that. I think women they wanted to give. I think it just grew out of tradition. It's a good question. Maggie, do you know why women?
I really don't.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about the different mitzvot mitzvot that are time related, that they
Yeah.
don't make women do because they have children.
But there are exceptions,
Right.
and this is one of the
But I
exceptions.
think it's just.
'Cause this is
it's
time-bound.
become tradition.
Yeah,
It's minhag.
yeah, probably minhag, and it became halacha over time. In other words, custom can actually become law if it's done over generations and generations of time.
Is there an age identification of the woman, right? Like,
Yeah, the woman has to be above bat mitzvah age, which is 12 and a half.
from,
In Judaism, adulthood begins at the onset of puberty, or what, I mean, instead of fixing it to that, it's estimated for girls about 12 and a half, and for boys 13. And then they become responsible for all the commandments. So, we're gonna skip the order, because that's just take us a long time to get through that. You have the Seder plate, on page 5, and that's just all symbolic, the Seder plate. It's, for example, the Zeroah, you see the roasted shank bone, which reminds us of the special lamb that was brought on the temple in Jerusalem on Passover as an offering to God. There is the paschal lamb, which in the time of the temple, I believe each person could bring a lamb and slaughter the lamb as how do I say this? As a commandment to observe for all generations. So the paschal lamb was indeed slaughtered in the temple. The slaughtering of the lamb stopped when the temple was destroyed. The only time you can do sacrifices, so this whole idea that we needed blood or that we would kill Christian children in the medieval period to get their blood to put on the doorpost, I mean, you couldn't kill a lamb to do that. I mean, you wouldn't, and for sure you would never, ever kill a human being for any reason other than self-defense. Yeah, oh yeah.
that's medieval.
Yeah, in the medieval period, there was,
justification for persecution of Jews.
exactly, don't
I
forget,
think that they would make that up.
yeah, there was, it was a justification for pogroms and for persecution during Easter period, because Easter and Passover fell at the same time, and during the medieval period, and really not until John Paul II and the what was it called? Second Vatican, right?
The Second Vatican.
Yeah, where the Jews were finally officially relieved of the idea that we killed Jesus. But that was for a long time. No, that was for a long time that the Jews were to blame. If you look at, if you see the film, what is it, The Passion of the Christ by Mel Gibson, which I did see, you clearly have that being depicted. There was no question. Now, he says the film wasn't anti-Semitic. Maybe it wasn't anti-Semitic, but it was certainly anti-Jewish in that it portrayed the Jews as being turning over Jesus for money, and you see the coin being flipped, and the Jewish person with the beard and the nose and all of that. It was clearly, if it wasn't intentionally anti-Semitic, it certainly was. It could have been construed and showed an extraordinary lack of sensitivity, particularly in light that the film was made long after Vatican II. So we won't go into.
Trying to be authentic.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I mean, I think. I think that for a long time the New Testament was read that way and was preached that way.
Well, the people that drove the nails were Roman.
Yeah, yeah,
I drove the nails.
Me too.
yeah,
We're sinners.
yeah. And it was Pontius Pilate who, Okay, so enough of that. You can see that the Beitzah, the boiled egg, comes new life in springtime. Some of this was done, you have to go back to the Talmud to understand that what they're trying to do, the mitzvah of telling of the Passover story is for the children. If you go to the Bible, it says, "V'higadat levincha," you shall tell your children on that day. And that's where the mitzvah is really upon the parents to tell their children, or the community to tell their children. The mitzvah is not on the child to hear it. The mitzvah is on the parent, is on the adult community to tell it to their children. So, as it is in our tradition, this is how the Seder came about. If you really want to study how the Seder was done in Talmudic times and before, there is what's called in the Talmud. There's a Talmud that's called Psachim, which sounds like Pesach, which is what it's all about. A lot of it deals with the Paschal lamb that was brought in the temple and how to do that. But the last chapter, chapter 10, is about the Seder. And so you get a sense of how the Seder was done in those times. It was a little bit different than what we do today, but essentially the same. But that's where we get it from. So they were telling the Passover story clearly before the time of the Talmud, and that's 425 CE. So you're looking at, Second Temple period for sure. The story of Passover was being told. And I would venture to say First Temple period and the exile that it was told. Because you have the Torah being completed around 525 when that verse appears, and probably existed before that time, portions of it. And Passover was always a very integral holiday in the Jewish tradition. Okay, so let's go to page 6. And that is the blessing over the wine. And the blessing over the wine is taken from Psalms, because in Psalms, wine gladdens the heart. So that's why you say the blessing over the wine. And they did that from long ago. And here in the Kiddush, you'll note just a couple of things. That God has chosen us from all peoples. This is the traditional text. And has elevated us from all languages. Lashon is language, literally language. And has sanctified us in his commandments. And has given us, and the Lord our God has given to us with love, the festivals for rejoicing. L'simcha means to rejoice. Holidays and sacred times, l'sason, for merriment. And the day, and this is where we're going to get specific, I'm translating it, is the festival of matzah. Et Chag HaMatzot Hazeh, this matzah festival. So it's referred to sometimes as Passover. Why? Because God passed over the children of Israel's home and saved them from the plague of death. But it's also known as the festival of matzah as well. So it takes on those two dynamics. One dynamic is God's providence, and that God redeemed us from slavery, from poverty, from hardship, and we, in order to be saved, we had to participate in the mitzvah of Passover, and that's why we had to put blood on the doorpost. It wasn't because the question is asked, in the Talmud, the question is asked, well, didn't God know, couldn't God distinguish between the Jewish homes and the Egyptians, or the Hebrew homes and the Egyptian? And the answer to that is yes, of course, because God is omniscient. They never thought of God as elsewhere. But human being, in order to have the miracle of Passover occur, human beings had to participate, and they indicated their belief that they were going to be redeemed before the redemption by putting the blood on the doorpost on the night of the Passover, the first Passover. There was a debate, actually, was the Paschal Lamb limited to the Paschal Lamb of that history, or was it going to continue for all generations? And it continued as long as the temple was standing, whether the first temple or second temple.
Well, the first Passover lamb, there wasn't a temple.
I'm sorry, what?
The first Passover lamb, there wasn't a temple.
That's right. That's right. They were commanded, right, that's very true. They were commanded on the 10th day of the first of the month to take the lamb and have it for 3 days. Animals were, I think, not, there was some divine-like aspect that the Egyptians considered animals, and specifically the lamb, as part of they're sort of sacred, that you wouldn't kill them. And so in defiance of that, to show their, quote, superiority, close quote, even though they were slaves, they took the lambs, paraded it around according to Midrashic tradition, and then slaughtered it in front of the Egyptians to show that they were no longer afraid of the Egyptians, that they believed in their redemption and believed in God, and therefore they were redeemed. That they had to participate, and that's an important principle. You've heard that joke about the person who, was a flood and various people came to rescue the person, first the police, and then an ambulance, and then a helicopter, and finally then they said, no, God is going to save me, and so forth. And you've heard this story, so yes, I'm not going to go through it. And that idea is apparent in the Passover story, though you don't get it here. You don't get that the children of Israel had to participate in the mitzvah of the Passover in order for the Passover to occur. And yes, you have chosen us from all people and elevated from all tongues or language. Zaman Cherutenu, the time of our liberation, the time of our freedom, Mikra Kodesh, a sacred proclamation, Zecher L'Yetziat Mitzrayim, to remember the exodus of Egypt, the going out of Egypt. This is the blessing that you're reciting. This is what people don't really understand, is that the Borei Pri Hagafim, the first blessing that you recite, it doesn't sanctify the day. That's just the blessing over the wine. It's this that sanctifies the day that you are to recite at the onset of the festival. For you have chosen us, Kivon, for through us you have chosen, and us you have sanctified from all people. You get a sense here of the particularism. It does read a little bit like superiority, I must confess. The notion of chosenness and elevated us from all other languages. I think there was a need to do that when they wrote these prayers, that there was a feeling of particularism and a special relationship to God. And there is tension within the Jewish tradition about the nature of that elevation, that nature of the chosenness, that is verbatim here in this particular prayer. So there are ways throughout the Seder and throughout the day where that feeling is tapped down. But I think historically, and particularly among the Orthodox, and I would say in some conservative, there is this element that the Jews are special. And sometimes we misinterpret that to mean that we're better, and we're not. We're obviously not any better than any other people of faith. Yesterday, I was driving down Hillside, and on the right there was a little series of shops, like a CBD shop and so forth, and a church, just a storefront church, and there were people outside saying, "Come pray with us. We will pray for you." About 10 or 15 of these people were out there encouraging, people to come. Now, of course, they have their agenda and all of that, but nonetheless, you sort of had to be impressed that the fact that they were out there with placards, signs, doing that, that they had that level of faith and that level of belief in their particular way in which they approach God. And look at all, other religions have that as well. I mean, Christianity, certain divisions of Christianity that still believe that unless you accept Christ, you're going to end up in hell. The only way to achieve eternal salvation is through acceptance of Jesus. Am I wrong on that?
Yeah, you're right about that, but they're wrong about that.
Yeah, sure. But what I'm saying is that you see aspects of this. You see that aspects of this in like Islam. But we you can argue about what's going on in Gaza and so forth. I don't want to get into that. But our history has never been one where we have forced people to convert. We've never instituted religious wars that were designed you either convert or you leave. We never did stuff like that. But we did believe that we were special, that we were unique, and that stays. And even in the Reform Haggadah, no one is going to change that liturgy. It's just there.
Well,
Okay, how are we doing, Tom?
Lord, I can make the case that it's true. Because you've survived all these years and all these persecutions.
No kidding, right? We're
Yeah.
still here.
I'm a believer in fact. And when you lay your case out, the facts.
Well, what does the evidence show? Well, yeah.
It shows that, and I'm arrested, and before the chief judge, I'll arrest and ask her for summary judgment.
Okay. Very, very good. If you turn the page now to page 7, you'll see this karpas blessing, the greens, the blessing over the parsley. Sometimes you'll see the parsley, or you'll see a baked potato. Any fruit, quote, fruit or vegetable that goes out of the ground, doesn't have a vine on it, but is on the ground, like say potatoes or
Adama.
Adama, right, exactly. Borei pri literally means the fruit, who created the fruit of the vine. Again, you say a blessing over that. And the only reason you do this, part of the problem of Passover is if the mitzvah is to tell your children of the going out of Egypt, and it's going to take 5 hours, you're going to need some things to hold their attention. So spread throughout the Seder are things that are designed to hold their attention, to put food in their stomachs. In fact, sometimes back in the time of the Talmud, it recounts putting nuts and candy out on the table throughout the Seder, so the kid will sit there and and listen, because once again, the mitzvah is not on the child, because the child isn't old enough, but rather it's the adult to tell the child. Okay, so the fourth thing is called yachatz, breaking the middle matzah, and that is to represent the 3 tribes. You break the middle matzah, you hide the afikomen. The afikomen is the middle matzah, half of the middle matzah, and that's considered to be the korban pasach, the sacrificial offering. At the end of the meal, you regain the afikomen, you play another game with the kids, you hide the afikomen, they find it, they barter with you, you pay whatever the going rate is for the afikomen on that particular day, and then the service goes on. That represents what's called the korban pasach, because you didn't just sacrifice the animal, you ate the animal. It wasn't as if we're going to kill the animal and that's it. You actually had the mitzvah of eating. So now we're going to go to the Magid, which is the actual telling of the story. And one of the most important parts is a prayer called Halachma Anya, which is about 7 lines from the bottom. This is the bread of affliction. But really, Anya doesn't mean affliction. It can also mean poor man's bread. Okay? Because why? Because it is matzah, right? And matzah is a pretty tasteless, commodity, which is interesting because here you have freedom, but also this very poor, this very modest kind of bread. So they call it here the bread of affliction, and it's written in Aramaic, so it's probably either First Temple period or Second Temple period, this particular prayer. But if you look at what it says, let all those who are hungry come and eat with us, let all those who are in need to celebrate the Passover, they leave this out here, come and share our meal. This year we are here, this year we are still slaves, next year we will be free. A couple of ideas here that are very important. The first thing is, and this is true in at least in the tradition, is a sensitivity towards the poor and those who are hungry that we identify with, and at many different festivals, many different holidays. It's not limited to this, where we are concerned with the homeless and we're concerned with those who are hungry. That precedes the telling and our celebration. So anyone who wants to come and celebrate the Passover at a Seder, they knock on your door, you invite them in. You don't turn anybody away. And that's even if they don't celebrate the Passover, they're just in need of food that they can come into your home and eat of your Passover meal. Yeah, you were going to say something.
I wanted to ask, I noticed it says now fill the second cup of wine.
Uh-huh.
Do you fill the whole cup up and do you drink the whole thing down all at once, or?
That's a good question. Actually, it's a good question. I forget the halacha on that, but you can.
Or you don't drink it all at once.
The first cup of wine, I think you have to drink all of it. I think it's between the third and the fourth,
Good.
if I'm not mistaken.
And
You
also
can
drink grape
you
juice.
can drink. Yeah. Now you can have grape juice.
Yeah, grape juice also. We always serve that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Just so you don't have to. And obviously, if you're a diabetic or you have to watch your sugar intake, then you don't you don't have to hurt yourself. But no, I remember when I was much younger, I would have the 4 full cups. And by the end of the service, it didn't matter how long the service was.
Just matter how you can get home.
Yeah.
Children slept well that night.
Yeah. And we always look at the movement from slavery to freedom, to being here, to being in our homeland, which is Jerusalem. The movement is, in some sense, we are always to think of ourselves as slaves, always moving towards freedom. Freedom, we haven't experienced total freedom. And here, this paragraph is a reminder. It's one of my favorite paragraphs. Okay, let's turn the page to page 9. And any questions or comments so far? Any? Okay. So you have
One thing.
yeah.
Is and we're looking at Passover wines. How is it just the preparation, or does it have a rabbinic blessing?
What?
The Passover wines, do they have a
Kosher
rabbinic?
for Pesach.
Kosher.
Yeah. They're very interesting. It's a very interesting question. In the old days, when I was growing up, and even I would say until about 30 years ago, when you bought Manischewitz wine, regardless of when you bought it, it was kosher lePesach. In other words, it would say on the label in Hebrew, kosher lePesach, and it would say underneath, kosher for Passover.
Already.
And I always operated under the idea that if you bought Manischewitz wine, that was that. Because when I was growing up, and even when I was a young adult, it was always kosher for Passover. Not so anymore. There's wine that Manischewitz makes, it's kosher. But then for Passover, there's special wine that has the label, if you're keeping kosher for Passover, which the two of you do not have to do. If you were going to keep strictly kosher for Passover, like I think when we try to do it as best we can, you have to buy the wine that specifically says kosher lePesach. That means it has a certification. I don't know why it changed. I think the problem was, Manischewitz, the company itself was sold, and I think I don't want to take the time to look it up on the YouTube.
We looked at it, it was sold.
The Coca-Cola.
Coca-Cola,
Yeah. Coca-Cola, interestingly enough, owns Manischewitz.
I'm curious about Passover wines.
And the reason it's called Manischewitz is that's the name of the guy who founded it. Came over from Europe, he made wine in Europe, came over to Chicago actually, built a plant, and began to manufacture kosher wine. And he was a very observant, very Orthodox
I
Jew.
have to disagree, but he named it after a rabbi.
Oh, really? Did he name it after? I thought his name was Manischewitz.
What did the rabbi? I think when we were looking.
Oh, you may be right. I just remember the article, but I could be wrong, yeah.
But he was from overseas, and he wanted to build it for a type of wine Jewish people could use.
Yeah.
And I think he, as I remember the story that we looked at.
He moved it to New York.
New York.
Yeah.
And he named it after a particular rabbi.
Oh, okay, okay.
I believe that's correct. I'll look at
Well, you may be right. I always thought it was the name of the man who founded the company, but
No, it was not.
okay, I stand corrected. There you go.
No,
So,
we just happen to have seen this.
but the reason why they moved was that they found that there was that they could plant vineyards there, I think, in New York that they couldn't do in Chicago, and they could get the grapes and make make
Concord grape.
the Concord grape, right.
Because they could they could weather those cold climates.
Right,
And
right.
that's what Welch's grape juice uses.
Yeah. So there you go. So so the Manischewitz wine is probably because Coca-Cola bought it it was no longer run by observant Jews. Rather, it was run by Coca-Cola, and who also brings you Diet Coke here and all kinds of other stuff that has corn syrup and so forth.
Yeah.
And therefore, now here's the interesting thing about the corn syrup is that for a long, long time, corn syrup was declared to be not kosher for Passover. But if I'm not mistaken, in the conservative movement now, that corn syrup, at least in the Sephardic movement for sure,
They drink Coca-Cola in Israel, in the
Yeah.
Orthodox communities during Passover.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
She doesn't like it because it's high
I
fructose.
don't like high fructose corn syrup.
You don't like what?
High fructose corn syrup.
Oh, you don't like corn syrup?
High fructose corn syrup is very bad for you.
That's what I understand.
Super, super sweet, and it makes, like, for instance, you used to could drink, 40 years ago, a Coca-Cola or eat a Snickers and be very satisfied. Now you eat a Snickers and you gotta have 10 more.
It makes you have crave more.
It makes you want more and more and more.
Of course.
Well, I never ate Snickers. But,
But you had a Coca-Cola.
oh, the Coke.
I think overseas they use real sugar though. They don't use corn syrup.
Oh,
Oh,
that's good.
I don't know what this has in it.
No, it's a diet Coke.
Yeah, it's his diet.
That's
I don't see anything in here about corn
No,
syrup,
no,
so.
it's the regular Coca-Cola.
No, I don't, yeah. Okay, so if you turn the page, there's a song on the right side called Avadim Chayinu, which means we were slaves. Again, there is, notice the we language as opposed to our ancestors. And that leads to a very, very important phrase that's on page 12. I'll read the Hebrew and you can see the translation. In every generation, a human being is obligated, Adam means human being, it doesn't mean Jew, is obligated to see himself or herself as if Ke'ilu, he was brought forth from Egypt. So the Passover story is not a historical event. It is one where we are to identify ourselves as slaves who were redeemed. In other words, when we tell the narrative, it should be in first person plural, first person singular, not our ancestors. Okay. The four children. Once everything comes in four. We had the four questions earlier, and now we come to the four different types of children. The reason why this is here is because it incorporates the four types of redemption. The verses, each verse pertains to a question or a comment that the children have that's related in the Torah, that's found in the Torah. Okay? So, for example, what is the meaning of the laws of Passover? That phrase is found in the Torah. Okay? So this is the wise child. Because of the detailed nature of the question. What are the laws of Passover? He or she has already accepted, by the nature of the question, the obligation of Passover and wants to do it what we call chidor mitzvah, want to make the mitzvah beautiful, and wants to know all the different laws pertaining to Passover so that he or she can observe it properly. Okay? The defiant child, now that's a very loose translation based on modern psychology. We don't refer to children as being wicked. However, the Hebrew is rasha, which means wicked. The Hebrew is rasha, but we tone that down and we change it to.
We might think it.
Well, if you having raised a couple, there have been times when I have thought that, and I've quickly dispelled that thought from my mind and rationalize it by, well, they're just kids, But it does run through your mind about children's. God made a mistake when he made children. And the mistake that God made was that he gave them free will. They're not really old enough to handle free will. He should have waited till 18. Everything should have been yes. Yes, Dad. Yes, Mom. Of course. Yes, immediately we will do it. But okay.
Good point.
So in the Hebrew, again, there's another phrase. What does this celebration mean to you? Again, it's to recite the biblical passage, and they do it in a creative way. The isolated child, it's the wicked child, does not include himself or herself in the question and acts like a stranger to the Seder. We challenge, but that's not really what we do. We respond, had you been in Egypt, you would not have been included when God freed our ancestors from slavery. It required belief. And we had this at the Interfaith Bible Study. The Hebrew, let's see, this is what's not good about this, is that it leaves out the Hebrew, so you don't get the flavor. I turned right to it. Okay.
That's a good lesson.
Yeah. So here, yeah. V'af ata hakei et shina. You should hakel respond sharply, but really shinav is his teeth. Hakel is to strike his teeth by meaning that you should give him a gnashing comment, harsh, what has come out of your mouth is obnoxious, and I'm going to put it back in there, something along that line. Hakei chinav, really, I've translated loosely as a biting comment. Here they translate it responding sharply. That doesn't quite fit. Ve'amor and what you should say, Be'avor ze asa Adonai li, for this reason, God did this for me, but say Tima Mitzrayim, in bringing me forth from Egypt. God did this for me. Implying, V'li v'lolach, for me, but not for you. Ilu hayita sham, if you were there, lo hayita nigal, you would not have been redeemed. Now, there is a midrash that talks about not everybody who was an Israelite at the time actually made it out of Egypt. Some stayed behind. In fact, only, according to this midrash, and we'll see later on, only 50,000 went, not 500,000. It's based on the Hebrew, and they play around with the Hebrew a little bit. But you get the sense, or in that midrash, you get the sense that not everybody believed in the redemption. And if you watch the Ten Commandments, you see Dathan is always trying to get them to come back and so forth out of his own selfish interest. But there was consideration in later rabbinic literature that not everybody participated in the redemption. Why? Because they would have to choose the freedom of the unknown versus the, knowing what you have. You have food on the table. You have to work ungodly hours, because they were not from God, without any rest, but you had food and you had a way of life. You knew you could survive. To go out in the wilderness, to go to the unknown and not know when your next meal is coming from, that took faith. And sometimes people forget that. I mean, just in the narrative, I'm I'm not talking about the truth or the untruth of the narrative, but just taking the narrative for what it's worth, it would have taken, not everybody would have gone. Now, of course, you have the 10 plagues and you have the signs and the wonders, but still, you could see some people being very pragmatic and saying, I put my faith in what I can see, not what I can't see, and to some unknown future, which becomes a parable, really, for freedom today. That the tendency towards, and I'm not, I don't want to get, I'm getting a little bit political, I can't help it, but there's always this tension in societies between freedom and saying, I don't want that freedom, I want somebody to just take care of me. I want the government that's going to do what it's going to do, and I don't want to get involved in the exercise, the responsibility that goes with freedom. And we see that in time and time again. And I think we're seeing it to some extent today with the way things are going in our country, a lot of power being put into the believe there's power in the executive branch, exercising it in ways that we're not used to seeing, and also in other countries, the rise of nationalistic movements, the feeling that we have to, and we're willing to vest authority in a singular person in order to solve certain problems and move away from the responsibility that goes with freedom, because freedom carries with it, unfortunately or fortunately, depending upon your outlook, a lot of responsibility. And that's that's reflected in these questions and these responses. Now, the difference, of course, is that in the narrative of the Passover, the people are putting their trust in God. But God is incorporeal. God is unknown. You don't know whether he's going to split the Red Sea. And then, I hate to say the punchline, but the punchline of the Passover story isn't freedom. The punchline of the Passover story is we substituted human law for a divine law to which we became once again enslaved, responsible for. And while we have the right to interpret the divine law and interpret it in ways that can even run contrary to God, there's a story in the Talmud that reflects that human beings, God can't tell us how to interpret the Torah. God has lost that power. We can't go against the Torah, okay, that's if you accept the Torah, but God can't tell us how to interpret the Torah. That's for us, right? There's a wonderful story that captures that. But when we recite the Shema, we're accepting the yoke of the kingdom of heaven, the ruler being God, and once we do that, then we are obligated to follow what we believe to be the divine law. However, the one thing that God doesn't have in Judaism is the right to tell us what it means. Why? Because Moses told us that. Moses in Deuteronomy says, Lo b'shamayim hi, the law is not up in the sky. It's not across the sea. It's not far from you. Lo b'shamayim hi, not in heaven, meaning God doesn't tell you how to interpret, but you're still bound by the law. And so there's this kind of middle ground. On the one hand, we're bound to the divine law, we're bound to that, but on the other hand, we have the right to interpret that. And the degree of interpretation, the degree of literalness, the degree of the oral law, that's something that can be subject to debate. That's why you have Reform Judaism. That's why you have Conservative. That's why you have Orthodox. The varying ways in which the Torah is understood and interpreted. So, I'll give you an example, and then with that we should probably stop. It says in the Torah that a person should not, a man should not lie with another man as he would lie with a woman. And that's understood to mean, of course, that you don't engage in homosexuality, right? And our tradition understands it that way, meaning the Talmud understands it that way and so forth. And because there's punishment, because it's considered an abomination, you'll get a kick out of this, it's strictly construed. Statutes that involve the death penalty and things like that are strictly construed. In other words, they're given the narrowest interpretation. So, for example, adultery, right? You shall not commit adultery. That only applies for purposes of punishment, not for how you understand law. For purposes of punishment, it means that it means to have relations with a married woman. The man who's married goes out and has relations with an unmarried woman. That's bad, and that is conceivably grounds for divorce. But it's not adultery as understood in the rabbinic tradition. Yeah, I remember in my rabbinic, when I was in rabbinical school, we were studying that phrase. We went through the Ten Commandments and so forth. And this professor, being the academic, when it came to that, so he looked up at the sky and said, I really don't know what this word tinaf, adultery, means. And I turned to somebody next to me and I said, well, maybe he doesn't, but my wife sure does. She's not ambiguous about that one at all. Very clear. She had no trouble. But when we look at the four sons, we don't think of it that way. But and we don't think of Passover that way. But it really is moving towards a different kind of slavery, this kind of middle ground between being a slave to a person and having nothing, having anarchy, not having a social contract by which we all work together to get along. And it's that middle ground that is, particularly when people are unhappy, that's very hard to sustain, very, very hard. And yeah.
I've heard it said, maybe perhaps cynically, that circumstances often dictate outcomes.
What's that?
Circumstances often dictate outcomes.
Yep.
And we always look at the environment and that kind of thing. But something, the glue that holds you together as a civilization comes from things like the Torah, the Bible, the Ten Commandments, the laws. And when you start saying, well, we don't need those, that's when we get in trouble.
I couldn't agree with you more. There's all kinds of talk about, from the Pew Study, I don't know if you looked at that recently, the Pew Study, churches are in trouble, temples are in trouble, and so forth. But those institutions are extremely important in society. This is what I believe. Of course, you can say I'm biased because of my position, but I think the job in society of our churches, and this is where, unfortunately, even in our faith, we've gotten away from this, is that churches have linked themselves to the political process. And I think when they do that, and whether it's a temple or whether it's Judaism or whether it's evangelical Christianity, you lose your moral authority. You diminish your moral authority by the extent to which you engage in the political process. What you should be doing is trying to convince people of the morality or the ethical nature, and the job of the temple, the job of the churches, isn't so much to promulgate a faith, whether it's believing in Jesus or believing in the Torah, but to teach our children and to teach one another to live ethically, to live according to the core dictates of how we treat one another as defined in our scripture.
Yeah.
And there's no other, this is what I believe, there's no other institution better equipped to do that than our temples and than our churches. That's our function. Our function is not to get into the courts and talk about abortion. Our function should not be to engage in that kind of political process, but rather our goal should be to provide some moral clarity or ambiguity, as the case may be, about what our sacred scripture, our sacred texts say. And to some extent, this is that kind of middle ground that I'm talking about, where we went from being a slave to Pharaoh to accepting the, quote, slavery, close quote, that comes from being committed to doctrine and to its teachings. You were going to say?
I was just saying that I have a book called All Manners Matter. It's a little book that's written like that.
Uh-huh.
When the family falls away and you don't have a family core teaching manners, courtesy, and respect, then the civilization is in big trouble.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is essential. You don't even have to have a religious background, but even believe in God. But it's like the reason Japan wasn't devolving after the samurai was because they came along and decided a code of manners and courtesy to keep from killing each other.
Yeah.
And under the old Japanese Empire, they had wars and things like that. And they finally started under Shogun to come along and say, we've got to have a strict code of manners
Mm-hmm.
and respect for one another to keep from killing each other. That's why we have wars.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so simple, but it's hard for people to grasp.
Yeah.
And I need to respect you, and I need to respect who I meet on.
Yeah, that's right.
That's why my daddy and mama taught me to say sir from the noun from the beginning, not because it was an artifice, but because it was a measure of respect.
Yeah, that's true. True. I'm just going to leave us with this thought. The lesson is so important that in the Haggadah, if you turn to, let's see, where is it at? Well, they don't have that phrase in here, but in these books, there's a very important phrase on page 34 in the other one, and there you go, that one, and it's at the very bottom. So first, Avadim Hayinu, we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and the Lord our God brought us out from there with a strong hand and an outstretched arm. For had the Holy One, blessed be He, had not brought our ancestors from Egypt, surely we, our children, our grandchildren, we would still be slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. So, let's suppose you don't have any children. So, even if all of us were wise, and all of us were prophets, and all of us were elders, mature, and all of us knew the Torah, let's say we knew the Torah by heart and we knew all of this, mitzvah aleinu nesapeh b'tziat Mitzrayim. It's a mitzvah upon us to tell of the going out of Egypt. Even if you don't have a child, and the halacha is, even if you don't have a child, then you and your partner should be telling of the story of Egypt. And if you don't have a partner, if you're all by yourself, it's still a mitzvah to tell of the going out of Egypt, because you yourself were redeemed, the fact that you're here. V'chol hamabel esapeh b'tziat Mitzrayim, and all those who continue to expound on the telling of the going out of Egypt, and this is why I've kept you longer, surely this is praiseworthy, because I wanted to get praise, so I kept you over time.
This is so fascinating for us.
Well, thank you.
Ignorant. we need to be learned.
Well,
No ignorance
we will
is-
continue this next time. Jesse, thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you for having me. Hey, so when's Passover?
Passover begins
Well,
on the 12th, the evening of the
Alright.
12th. And the community Seder is on the second day of Passover, which is a Sunday night,
13.
All right,
14th. So,
the 14th. Alright.
is the 14th a Sunday, whatever that Sunday is?
Sunday is 13th, I think.
What's,
All right.
today is the 23rd, next week is the 30th, and so 31 days, so that would be, 30th would be like the 6th, the 13th, yeah, it's the 13th.
All right.
Okay, anyway, we'll look forward to next week. We'll finish up Passover, and then by then it'll be time to celebrate. Then after that, we'll have one on the Shoah and maybe two on the creation, the rise of Zionism and the creation of the State of Israel, and that will conclude the series. Okay?
Thank you.
Jesse, have a good rest of the Sunday. Thank you so much for coming, and I'm really
Thank
glad
you.
you could. Thank you.
So next Sunday you guys are having a meeting?
Yep, uh-huh.
Okay.
So you're welcome to come in person. The building will be
All
open.
right.
And if not, please feel free to come online. Thank you so much for coming.
All right. Thank you, Rabbi.
Sure, take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
By the way, Rabbi, from our Thursday night meeting,
Mhm.
the land of Ramses was wrong.